Good day to you. My name is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. It's my pleasure to have today Frank Guthrie from the RLI, a sergeant in the RLI, and he also did some time in 10RL. And he's volunteered to come on board and give us a talk today, which is really welcome. Frank, hello to you. You're in South Africa. I'm in Chile, England. What's the weather like over there?
Hello, Tony. Thank you very much for this, and thank you for inviting me on. It's good. I'm in the south of South Africa. I'm down in the Cape, and the weather now is probably going to be different by the time we finish speaking. So it's really it's been not a bad day so far. That'll change.
Yeah, because the Cape's very volatile with its weather, isn't it? It's a bit like Pietermaritzburg. When I lived in Pietermaritzburg, you got four seasons in a day. Rain, sunshine, cold, warm. It was amazing.
Especially at this time of year, as we come out of the rainy season and we go in, but it is a beautiful part of the world.
It's exquisite.
I'm very fortunate to live here.
As I've said on every other one of my interviews, I've got long bloodline Afrikaner going down that way. So I feel Africa in my bones, and I feel the Cape even more for some reason. But Frank, give us an overview of where you were born, raised, and how you got into the army.
Sure. I am South African. I'm ninth generation South African. My family's been here for years. My surname is Guthrie, which is a Scottish descent, but I have more blood relationship to Chabalala than I do to Guthrie. So it's just one of those names that I've been hooked up with. My family were down in the Cape. My great grandfather had started a legal firm down here, which is still in existence. And his son became a lawyer because he was obliged to family tradition. And as soon as his father died, he decided, no, I don't want to be a lawyer. I haven't wanted to be a lawyer. I want to go prospect for gold. So he went off and he took his family from here to Nigel, of all places. And if you know Nigel in the Transvaal, it is probably the bleakest place outside of the Karoo in South Africa. And so the family moved from the Ferris Cape to Nigel. And he learned something about gold mining there. And then he went up to what was then Rhodesia, obviously. And he went prospecting. And his son, my father, followed him up there. And so I was born and bred up in Rhodesia. And just normal childhood there, which is a little bit different to childhood today, I think. And then went to school. Then after school, received call-up papers. I'd wanted to go to university, but my father, who felt that it would be better that I do my call-up first and get that off my thing, and I didn't have much say in that. So when I got my call-up papers, I went in, as we all did. I was on an intake called 137, right? So 137 was the largest intake that they'd ever had in national service intake. And the one prior to that, 136, had been also the largest intake it had up until that time. So when I got to Llewellyn, I remember I'd been in school. I've not been in boarding school. I'm in school, my first time away from home, all those things, and I head down to Llewellyn, which is in Bulawayo, which I didn't even know was in Rhodesia. But anyway, I get to Bulawayo, to Llewellyn Barracks, and the place is pit. Everywhere you look, there's people. They haven't got barrack rooms for us. We're sitting up in these big tents. I go into this tent. You go down to the mess hall to eat, and then you have to take that tin tray. You have to take it back, and you have to wash it in a sink of cold water that is so full of shit and gravy. And it's worse when it comes out of there when it went in. Yeah. And there was a little corporal who was looking after our tent, who just decided that he hated me, and he just gave me hell. Nothing I could do was right, and he would just give me hell. So anyway, I'm feeling very sorry for myself and miserable, and I come out and we meet this soldier, and he's dressed brilliant. I mean, he's got the camo on, but it's pleated, it's straight, and he's got this white and green belt and this sharp green beret with this silver badge, and he says he's from the RLI, and he's looking for recruits from the RLI. So I said, well, where is the RLI? And he said, it's in Salisbury. So I said, what do I have to do? And he said, you have to run around this block and do a couple of things. I've never run around a block so fast in my life. Anyway, I got selected for RLI selection. And he said to me, okay, you're in the real army now. If anybody here gives you trouble, you can tell them to F off. Okay. So I go into my tent. I'm packing up. This little corporal comes in. Says to me, he starts giving me hell. So I tell him F off. So I'm taken down to the RPs. So fortunately, they called Charlie. I can't remember his surname, but anyway, Charlie, the sergeant comes in and he explains, and I'm taken out. I get in my train and I go back to Salisbury, and we go to a real man's army where, as you walk into the mess hall, you're given a clean tray. You pick it up. You don't have to wash it. You leave it on the table. It's just chalk and cheese. I felt like I was at home. And the training was quite bad, but it was, just we all went through it. It wasn't that. I mean, I didn't know what RLI was. I didn't know anything about it at all. I just knew it wasn't Llewellyn. And that was sufficient qualification for me to justify moving down. And so I went through a training trip, ended up going into one Commando, fondly known to us as the Big Red, and spent a year of national service with them. Initially, we did a couple of trips into Mozambique, but after I think the first or second trip was when Mozambique got independence, or Frelimo took over, and the Portuguese, after that coup in Portugal, and it was handed back to the Frelimo.
So that was about 1973, was it?
Late 70, it was early 74 that I was there. So there was obviously some time delay between the two. But my first trip, I remember going in, and there were Frelimo. We worked with, not with Frelimo, with the Portuguese soldiers. They were when we went across to Mozambique, and that was a lot of fun because based up in where we were at the time, on the border there, you would go across, and so long as you let them beat you at football, I'll make it sound that they were pretty good at football. It was about the limit of their ability. They would give you free booze all night. They had it tough, those guys, as a national serviceman. You were called up in Portugal and sent off to some place in Africa. You weren't sure where Africa was, let alone Mozambique. You come here, they get paid the equivalent of what was then 10 cents a day, with all the cigarettes and booze you could possibly want, but no money. And they were expected to fight these guys, and they were getting whipped. I mean, they were really getting their backsides kicked by Frelimo. And none of them had an interest in it, and I really felt sorry for those guys. But anyway, it wasn't fun for them, and it became less fun for us, obviously, when they pulled out, because then we didn't have the free cigarettes and the free booze, and people started to shoot at us when we went across the border. So it changed the dynamic quite a lot. We were based at that time at Mukumbura, which is the northern border, famous for a couple of things. One of them was Kachas, and the other one was a ground wasp that was particularly nasty. Kachasu was I don't know if you're familiar with it, it was a locally brewed wood still drink that could literally turn you blind drunk, and it was quite handy to have. Anyway, so I spent some time there. I was a troopie in my very first contact. I didn't know what the hell was going on. We'd gone on a 5-horse trip into the valley, and we were based at Mount Darwin, and somebody shot and wounded our medic. And because I'm quite a big guy, and I looked like I could carry heavy things, they made me carry the medic bag at that point. And as a result of that, I became a troop medic for a while. And again, my only qualification for that was the fact that I could carry the bag. And so they sent me then, when I got back, on a short medics course, which taught me, which was the good stuff in the bag, like the codeine cough mixture and stuff like that, and a couple of other things that were I was a very naive youngster, and I think a lot of us who were brought up in that time were, in the ways of the world. I had no idea about drugs. I just knew that they were taboo, and if you said heroin, you'd probably die. But aside from that, it was... so in all these things, codeine, all the medicines, etc., it was just news to me, but I got to learn quite quickly. So I was a medic for a while, and then because I could still lift heavy things, they made me carry a gun, which is another thing. And that's where I ended up, was my trip. And we spent alternative times there between being in patrol or OP trips, and every consecutive bush trip was Fire Force, and always at Mount Darwin. And at that time, we were spending 4 weeks in the bush and 10 days out. That changed a little bit later to become six weeks and 10 days, and sometimes slightly less. And then when the operational areas spread around a little bit, Fire Force became more prevalent, and that's where it went. And so I served out my year. When I had finished the year, just a point of interest on there, perhaps. we were based in Mount Darwin, and we got the highest. We after one bush trip, we'd lost. It was a bad trip. We lost a few guys in a contact there. Peter White, Doug Cookson. I think there were 4 guys who were killed in an ambush, and that was in those days. It was big numbers, but we got the highest number of kills of any bush trip in that bush trip, and I think the number was 12 that we managed to get in that 4 weeks. In my last bush trip, we again got the highest number of kills. Like, it was now a 6-week bush trip. It was just over 150 kills in that bush trip. And now we were based at Harare South, not Harare South Country Club, out towards Bandura, the country club out there. I forget what it's called, but we were literally, you could see the lights of Salisbury at night. So the war had moved from white out in the sticks right close to town, and we never lost a battle. But man, they just kept coming. We couldn't win that thing. It was, but that was in hindsight. At the time, you don't realize, you just keep doing what you're supposed to, what you're paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
So then I left, and I went, and I decided I was going to go mining, and I joined a company called Rio Tinto, and they were based in Empress Nickel Mine, and I went down, which is the central part of Rhodesia, and Guello, and when I got my first call up, it was with 10 spat. So I went with them, and I did a 6-week bush trip with them, and I hated it. And I was arrogant, and I thought I was better than everybody else, because here I am, I'm an RLI, I'm a mana. You can't put me with these oaks. And I just, I got into trouble. I got into so much trouble. I was drunk on the thing. But I came out of there, and it wasn't a good experience. And I didn't enjoy it, and nobody else enjoyed me being there. So it was a mutual thing. And shortly after that, I met up with the Commando. One Commando had been offered the freedom, well, they hadn't been offered, they had been granted the freedom of the city of Godoma, or Gatuma. What do you do with the freedom of the city of Gatuma? I don't know, but they came there, and I went down and met the guys, and got drunk and lined up. It made me realize how much I missed that. I was then called up. There was a second call up, and we were called up back to the RLI for a 28-day camp. It was the first time they did this, because they wanted to boost the numbers there. So they figured if they could call up the guys who'd served in the RLI back to the RLI, it might be a good. So they called up about 30 of us, and we went back to one Commando, and we served in one Commando for a 28-day camp. And that wasn't good. You can't take people out of the streets and expect them to act, sort of work at the same level, or as guys who are doing it almost professionally. It didn't work. It was a stuffer. And so after that, they said no, they were going to cancel at the end of the 28-day camp. There were rumors then of continuous call-up. So, and there were 3 of us, Chalky Van Skoltwyk, Bob Harrison, and myself. We decided that, no, we're not going to leave. We're going to stay and see what happens. And so we stayed. And a week after the other guys that stood down, continuous call-up came in. And all those other guys were called up. And they tried to get back to RLI, but they weren't allowed in. So we were the only 3 guys who did continuous call-up with RLI. So as a national serviceman, I started to serve again. We did another, I think it was 14, 15 months then. But all 3 of us were, we'd been around. We had a bit of experience. I don't want to be derogatory, but a lot of the RLI guys were the old soldiers were there because they couldn't be fitted anywhere else in the army, and they went to the RLI for that. So we were considered to be sort of maybe a little bit more of leadership material than the others. So all 3 of us were acting as troop corporals or sergeants, or and we didn't have any rank. So I think they kind of figured that they had to give us some rank. So the 3 of us were all promoted to the staggering height of Lance Corporal. And that was quite a big deal in the RLI, and we were the first non-regular soldiers ever to achieve an NCO rank in the RLI. That claim to fame. I was the first NCO. It was first Lance Corporal. And then from there, we just went on. I served a little bit longer, served that 14 months, and then when I left, I wanted to leave the country. And I wanted to, John Gordon Davis, I guess, I wanted to go shoot whales. I don't know, I just wanted to travel. And but I felt that I had to do my bit, which was the rationale at the time. But when I look back in hindsight, that's bullshit, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Wasn't that? But I decided that I would stay on as a regular soldier because they would back pay me for that year that I'd been there, and I would get a little bit of a lump sum, and I'd only have to serve another. It turned out to be about another year and a half that I had to serve there. So I did that, and I stayed on, and then I was promoted to full corporal, and just before I left to sergeant, I over a 4-year period, I spent about 3 years, 3.5 years with the RLI, and I left in 1978. And then I moved down to South Africa, and I couldn't get a job on a whaling ship. I managed to get a job cooking lobsters on a sea ship, which put me off the sea forever. I was just sick, and I will not eat crayfish anywhere at any time as a result of that. And my father was dying at the time. He was very ill. He had a business up in Harare, at least up in Salisbury, and he asked me to come back. So I went back to Rhodesia, and I joined his business. That was almost towards the end of the war. And because I was running a business, I was allowed to be part of what they call the ADPU, the Army Data Processing Unit. I knew nothing about data, and I knew nothing about processing, but I just knew I didn't. It helped me to be able to run my business and be there. So I was there, and I happened to be on call up on the day that the election results were coming out, and I was taking in a new intake of people at Cranbourne Barracks, and I heard the results on the radio, and I just closed up. I picked up my stuff, and I walked out, and that's how I left the army. That was the end of my army career. That's just sort of basic an overview of my army career. There were quite a lot of fun in between that, and obviously you're with the RLI, you're in call-ups. We're paratrained. We're mostly fire force. We're doing cross-border raids. So there was quite a bit of action involved. But I'm sure our listeners here all know that, and they don't need to be told war stories.
Actually, that plays a very important part of this channel, and it's something I want to sort of draw out of your memory banks because of what happened to you later on in your life. Can you describe the fire force action where you saw the most action? Can you describe your feelings, what it was like getting in that helicopter? Describe the actual action for our foreign viewers, for people who still would like to hear these type of stories. Give us an overview of what was going through your mind, the knots in your guts as you were landing, how you even looked to position yourself in the stop group. You know, these many tactics are very interesting to me. Could you just describe that?
Sure. It kind of felt. It depended where you were. We were mainly in Upper Hurricane, initially from Mount Darwin. We were fighting against the ZANU-PF at the time, and they weren't great fighters. Their thing was to run, and that made it very difficult to fight with them. At least Zipra were better; they would stay and fight, and that was great because that meant that you could have. When I said it was great, it's just. We had more success in those sort of operations. We couldn't run quite as fast as the ZANU guys. So you'd have people out there patrolling and doing the hard work and sitting there in the bush, quietly looking and trying to find out where the tours were. And then they would send in and they would say, okay, we have a sighting. They'd have on an OP or something, they'd have a sighting. We're sitting back in base camp, all fighting hangovers and drinking merrily in the evenings and having a good time and generally just taking it easy, playing cards. And then we'd get the call out, we'd all get dressed up and you get your equipment on. And the first wave would go out, always 4 helicopters with a K car. And the K car carried the Commando of our battalion, the colonel, or the major, whoever was in charge of our Commando, our OC. And the K car we'd go up and we'd land on the scene. They would immediately start circling to look, and they would start opening fire. And then we would be dropped off at a point where we could see that we're running. So if we saw the terrorists were going north, but they usually would bomb shells. It was a bit difficult. So, but the K car would decide where the best place would be to drop us, and we would be dropped there. Sometimes we could engage in a contact, and then if that happened, the next wave would be put out as stop groups, and we would go through it. I worked in Fire Force when you went through like that. We weren't sneak soldiers. You were going through there. As you walked through, anything that moved, anything that could hold a person, you put a couple of rounds into it because you knew that if you didn't, you might get shot there. And so it was a different sort of warfare to the other types of thing. It was a great deal of excitement, sometimes terrifying, and the first couple of contacts, you don't know what the hell's going on. People are just yelling you to do this and do that, and after a while, you get to become. I don't think you ever become used to it. Well, you don't become used to it, but you become a little bit more aware, and I think greater awareness makes you even more terrified because then you know what's going on and what's happening. And but we did it when we were successful at it. It was just expected of us, and didn't know any way different.
When you landed on the ground, okay, you've been dropped off by a helicopter now. You've been told by your major circling in a K car that that's your stop point. How did you position yourself? It's fairly self-obvious that you've got to look for the best place to hide yourself so you're not seen by the escaping terrorists. What factors did you look for to sort of hide yourself and engage the enemy at the same time?
If we could, always a little bit of high ground with open and looking at your fields of fire just to make sure that you had a little bit of clarity. You don't want to be stuck in a crop of thorns or anything like that. So we look for a clear patch. As soon as you get off the helicopter, you just all bombshell and you collapse on the ground, and then the stick commander brings it all together, and he's in comms with the OC, and that will then tell us where we need to move, which direction we need to move, and as we'll move into the direction, and we'll settle, and just wait instructions from above. A little bit like getting chats from God.
And did you have those day glow panels so that
yes, on the back of our combat caps, yes.
I know what you're trying to say. It's a lady's part, yes.
Yeah. We had the day glow panel, but for most part, I didn't wear a hat. We went, our uniform was a T-shirt, a camouflage T-shirt, shorts, bush shorts, and fellies without socks. It was just as lightweight as possible. We wanted to be as light as possible and carry us. So we weren't in full camo. We weren't, it was very lightweight. And then later, when they introduced para, your first wave would go in with a helicopter, and then we as the parachute troops with the Dakota would come past, and they would drop a stop group behind that, and you'd be parachuted in. And that was quite interesting. I've done just over 25 jumps, right? I have never ever jumped from 1,000 foot or higher than 1,000 foot. I've got out at one point. I jumped out I was the first man out, and when you've only got 16 guys in that Dakota, right? And as they go out, it's less than a second per person to get out of there. It's happened to me when I've been on the ground, and guys are still coming out of the aircraft. At that point, you're only 300 foot high, and if something goes wrong with your chute, that's it. There's no chance to change it. So there was some mistakes made, and I landed quite badly on a couple of occasions there. And one stage, I messed up my ankle quite badly.
I think the lowest measured confirmed height for a combat jump was 290 feet. Which
really?
Just beggars belief. I mean,
yeah.
The foreign soldiers listening to the story, they must think we were nuts, walking around half naked, no helmet, no chest ribbing, no armor on the chest. Just unbelievable, but that's the way it was.
It's just the way it was, and we used to parachute in much the same gear, except that we had a little motorcycle gear. I think a friend of mine, there's Archer. I think he has the record for the most para jumps ever.
Yes, 78, I think.
Is it 78? I'm not sure what the number is.
Yeah.
but it's something like that. We also had a record, which is a ridiculous record, for the most operational jumps in one day.
Yes.
I mean, and that's 3.
Yes.
Can you imagine? I mean, taking 3 parachute jumps in one day into operational, it is unheard of. And we carried you carried your FN, it was strapped, and then always a sidearm. And I usually carried a 9mm Browning for that, until one day, and I used to use it to clear huts, right? And it was an effective weapon. It was a very easy weapon to use, and pretty good for what it was. One of our fellow troops, a guy from the States, was going back into town and asked me to look after his handgun, and he was carrying a 357 Magnum. And yeah, and this thing was a beautiful long barrel. I felt like Audie Murphy, and I just tucked away my Browning and parked this thing in my holster.
Yeah.
And I had to clear a hut with this thing, and I took it out and I fired a couple of rounds. And I learned that those cowboy guys are lying, because you can't just use one. Well, I couldn't use one hand for that, and nearly broke my wrist when I fired it. So I went back to the Browning after that, but it was.
Right. Yeah. Let's go back. You've landed on the ground. I'm trying to refer to probably the most frightening contact you had. All successful. You can bleed one story into another. Take me forward from that point, Frank. What happened?
We'd come in. It was the most frightening contact. The most frightening contact for me wasn't actually when we were deployed by the helicopter. In a helicopter, the helicopter that was next to us actually got an RPG-7 at it, and it was shot out of the sky. But from low down, none of the guys were hurt or injured. The helicopter was destroyed, and that was a tough contact because there was quite a crowd, and there was some mix-up. The sighting that they had was of a small offshoot of this group, and we were dropped at a zone which we thought was a distance from where they'd been sighted, but was actually right where the main camp was. So we'd landed almost in the main camp where these guys were, and we got shot. And that's, but it all worked out in the end. We lost a couple of guys on that day as well, and that helicopter, and it was. Everything's disorganized. There's a lot of noise, and to tell you that I can remember exactly what went on there, except for the hype. And I just remember seeing one guy, one of the enemy, who was lying there. His arm was broken, the bone was sticking out. His leg was shattered, and he had stomach wounds, and he was just screaming in agony. So I just shot him. And it's those little things that come back to haunt you. At the time in the heat, you think it's okay, but when you think about killing that guy, and another time when we'd been in a contact, and I came around a corner, and I was in charge of this troop, and coming towards us was a turret that would obviously been lost. His head was down, he was hanging. He was just walking towards us, and he didn't see us. And it was getting late, and I shot him as well. And that was later. It comes back to haunt you a little bit. The actual taking of a human life sometimes, and killing civilians, which happened a couple of times by accident or as part of the deal that you're involved in. Those are the things that haunt me more than anything else. Is the number of people you know that you've shot when you're actually in combat, and you see them and you line up your gun and you see the guy go down. That's different. That's we're all in the same boat here. But when you're shooting people that are, it's sort of an unfair contest, as it were. That's what that's.
Absolutely. And obviously at some point you must have gone into these contacts as a commander. You're a corporal or a sergeant.
Yeah.
How did that weigh on you? Did you worry about getting your guys killed from the wrong decision? Did you do well at that, or was it more of a cooperative effort? Because our army was unique. None of us took shit from anyone else, really. How did that work with you as a stick commander?
Well, as a stick commander in the RLI, even at the rank of corporal, nobody called me Frank. You called me corporal. I was. I was. There was a lot of respect for rank.
Yeah.
And the guys listened to what you said. So when you told them what to do, they tend to do what they did. Again, in hindsight, when I look back, and I think I'll perhaps talk about this a little bit later as an aspect of this, which I never realized at the time, but which was in play quite strongly at that time. And it came up again when I went on Osby's course, officer selection course, at one point in my career. I went on there. But just getting back to a question you asked just now, Malaparte, Villa Salazar, was on the border with Mozambique, and the southeast border was Mozambique. And Malaparte was a big enclave. It was full of Frelimo, and it was all sorts of things. It was a problem place. And we'd had a Canberra shot down there. We had a couple of other problems from that. And so they decided, what we decided, the powers that be decided, was that we were going to starve them out, right? And we were going to we were going to patrol around Malaparte, and was it?
Malvernia.
No, sorry, Malaparte, Malvernia is what I'm thinking of. We were based at Malaparte, sorry. And so Malvernia, we were going to patrol around that, and we were going to try and prevent supplies getting in. And so we were walking, we were patrolling, and my stick was right on the northern side of the sweep line. And I heard turkeys, and it was close to Christmas. And so I stopped the guys and I said, there's turkeys up here. It means there's a village which has got food. And the idea was to wipe out all the food. So they said to me, okay, so we stopped the stick line, and I took my 4 guys and we turned and we walked up. And we came across, and there was a mound there. And I walked over that mound, and we were lost. It wasn't a village. It was actually the camp that we came in. As I came up over the mound, where there was a trench, and I saw this guy at the same time that he saw me. I mean, he wasn't expecting anything, so I was ready. So I fired at him, and then they just fired back at us with everything that they had. And I have never been shot at. And so we got back, and we took cover. And I'm standing there, and the guys I wanted to run. I'm saying, just hold. And we're sitting there, and then I get over the radio. The other guys have left, and so we start going, and we just ran. And there were RPG rockets coming at us. One of the guys broke his leg. We picked him up. We managed to carry him. And then artillery came in to help us. That was the only thing. They couldn't send in airplanes or any sort of air support. So the artillery came in. The 14-pounders came in. And they were dropping rounds literally 20 meters from us, between us and the Frelimo that were in. They were dropping those rounds in front of us. It was I never realized just how good those guys were. To this day, I support the Gunners or Arsenal as an English soccer team simply because of that incident. I became a fan of the artillery.
Yeah.
And but that was the most terrifying contact I'd ever been in. And it took us literally 20 minutes to run. I think it was 4 Ks out of there. But they were sending troops around. They were really, Frelimo was not a Boy Scout group. They were a serious organized army.
Yeah.
And they wanted us, and they were pissed off with us, and they were coming to us, and that was quite nerve-wracking. But those sort of things, it's that high excitement at the center, Rhodesia, which is on the border between, which is on the road going down to Beit Bridge.
Yeah.
So what had happened is a couple of tourists coming up from South Africa to Rhodesia had been ambushed. And they'd been killed. So the Rhodesian government decided that, no, we have to show South Africa that we're taking this seriously. We're going to send RLI down there. And one commander ends up going down to Rhodesia, where we've got this. And there was nothing. We drank every day, all day. We were continuously partying. It was, when I got back from that bush trip, my canteen bill was higher than my salary. It was...
It was a real shithole to Rhodesia, wasn't it? Just a dust bowl, yeah.
It was on that airstrip. It was, and then when you did get called out, you got these helicopters, and they had to fly you for an hour and a half. So it didn't matter that you were drunk when you got on. By the time you'd got to where you're going, you were normally sober. We weren't para at that time, but it just, I mentioned that just because it was those things, the fear, the excitement of the contact, which might go on for 10, 15 minutes or maybe a little bit longer sometimes when we did the camp attacks. That was just such a small part of the whole experience. It was mostly the time was spent bored, trying to fill in the time. waiting for something to happen, or patrolling or doing sort of mundane stuff. So,
did you see any action on any externals?
Yeah. Aside from that, that particular one that we were doing on Malvania was a cover. We launched, and that was an attack against them, so that when they did Mapai, they did that at the same time. I was not involved in Mapai.
Right.
We used to do the externals from into Mozambique, and we used to do it on foot, and we'd patrol in at night. And you'd have to hit these camps first thing in the morning. The problem is, as anybody who's listened to this, who's been in those areas know, to try and map read in the valley, they don't put names on trees, or because there's nothing to read on the map. You've got this flat map, and you have to make it. And we got lost awfully a lot of times at night, and we'd walk for miles and miles.
Are you talking southeast here, northeast?
Northeast. Going into Mozambique.
Oh, yeah, it's as flat as a billiard table.
Yeah, going into the Zambezi Valley. And I remember one particular camp that we went to, and we had to cross across the river, and we were told that we cannot drink water from that river because it had been, they put some sort of stuff in it, which wasn't, I don't know how true that was, but anyway, that was the story. So we come in, we're supposed to hit first light. We finally get there at about 11 o'clock in the day. The place is almost empty. There's about 3 people running around, which, and we went, and as we swept through that river, the guys just dropped, and they were drinking that water. The dehydration, that was, and I think it was a result of that, or 1 or 2 other trips like that, where they realized if we're going to do a cross-border stuff, we're not going to do it this way. We're going to have to do it by helicopter, and that's why it started coming in. And that's where the paratraining and that sort of thing came in. So when we did a cross-border jumps, you went in. I was never involved in a very big hitting a camp. Every time we got to a camp, it was normally empty. And we now know in hindsight why, because they had the information that we were coming, and from whence that came, I don't know. I did 1 or 2 little small things with with some Sulu Scout guys trips that were much more successful, but those were smaller camps that we hit there, sort of 30, 40 guys and that sort of thing. And that was very different to the big camps. We did one into Zambia, which was quite interesting. There was a guy with me. He's since died. Big guy. He'd been in the RLI since I don't know, since it started. Terry Cotter, and he was just one of those guys, and he just got away with it all the time. He just never did anything. There was a guy that he pranged and damaged more vehicles than any other single person I know in the RLI. So they transferred him across to MT, of course, which you do in the army. And then he went to the kitchens because he could eat a lot. And we were desperate for guys on this particular sweep, and he was in with me, and he was walking next to me, and he was this big guy. We come across this trench, and this soldier jumps out, hands up like this, and don't shoot, I'm the cook. And Cotter just says, so am I. Goes, shoots him. So it was just again, it's not funny really, but it was at the time, just those things that we did. And
it just
in the spur, I mentioned I shot that one guy who we were doing a follow-up on I'd been sent down to Malapati with my stick only. There were 4 of us, and we were based in Malapati. We were the fire force. So it was just a mini fire fest. We had 1 K car and 1 troop carrier. So they would find little groups of Greeks. They were having a wonderful time. We'd get the sightings, we'd go out, the K car would shoot the hell out of them. We'd go down there, sweep through, and be told, oh, heroes. And the 4 of us, our little stick of 4, had more kills than the rest of the commander put together for that little trip. And then one day they had a sighting of 150 people, of 150 terrorists. So I went in, I took the briefing, and they told us, and I said, well, okay, I'll only take 2 guys with me this time. Anyway, the SAS were also based there at the time. So they said to us, no, we can't send you, we're going to send an SAS. And I said, okay. And I went in a second wave. I didn't go in with the first. So we came in with SAS. Now, we know what Fire Force is. You don't mess around. SAS were without doubt the best soldiers in the Rhodesian army. Bar none. It was a unit that was just, I'm still in awe of it. I thought they were absolutely amazing. But they were not used to fire force. They would do overborder ops and everything was sneak, sneak, sneak. In that bush especially, and 3 of them were shot in that contact simply because they didn't clear bushes and they didn't know how to fight that particular battle. It was our forte. I couldn't do what they did, and they weren't so good at what we did. And then I did the follow-up on that. I did the follow-up, and we were following tracks, and we followed it down to the Limpopo, which was on the South African border. And that's where we found this disillusioned, this little tour who was lost from it. He was carrying an SKS, and you only get an SKS if you were a bucksheet trooper. You didn't, the AKs were given to the serious soldiers. Just to give you a weapon, they gave you an SKS. And I picked up that SKS and we carried it with us. Unfortunately, I'd reported it because when we got down to the Limpopo and we saw the tracks going into South Africa, I managed to get a hold of the South African side and tell them that there were tracks which they denied it couldn't possibly be. So we went across and they invited us across there. And then, man, it was wonderful. They had wonderful food. They had wonderful rat packs. They looked after us. I could have sold that SKS, I don't know how many times at that point. And if I hadn't reported it, I would have. But it was just, it was a different, a different war. The experiences of it are difficult to explain in light of modern day warfare.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think anybody will ever experience what we've been through there. It's just not going to happen again. Our warfare has changed to that extent.
But I've watched documentaries of British troops and others in Afghanistan, and they can see where the enemy is firing from. And they've all got their helmets and they're in little mud forts and they're shooting back, and then they get an Air Force plane to come in and bomb them. And then the one commentator actually said, "Oh, look, he's on his motorbike. He's going away to fight another day." They just engaged these guys, and then they bomb-shelled and buggered off on a motorbike. They were never surrounded. There was no vertical envelopment of the enemy position. It was, excuse me, boom, bang, bang. Oh, we got one of them with a law or whatever. And then they drive away to fight another day. You just don't let them. It's crazy.
Different wars. Yeah.
Tell us about your paratrooping. Where were you trained, Frank?
The what, sorry?
Where were you trained? Paratrained, South Africa or
no, I was paratrained at New Serum in Salisbury. That's something else that I remember. That a 2-week course to learn how to parachute, right? And the first couple of days we had to do PT, obviously. And the first day after PT, honestly, the next morning, I couldn't get out of bed, mate, because they worked our stomach muscles to such an extent. I had to roll over and crawl out onto my hands and knees and pull myself up. I was completely spent. So we had a week of intensive physical training. And then you go to New Serum and then you start doing this paracourse. And I wanted to go skydiving here at one point. And I was looking at that. Oh, you'll come in the morning, you do a bit of training, then you jump out in the airplane in the afternoon. And very different to the way we were taught. I mean, we did that teaching that 1, 2, 1, 2, and just getting right, stand up, hook up, and shuffle to the door type thing, and then jumping out. And I do remember my first jump as being quite, because it was such a terrifying experience. But you're so caught up in the line that you're not going to not do it, and you go out of it, and then landing on the ground, and just the exhilaration of wanting to get straight up and go and do this thing again. That was wonderful. On the same time that we were on course, there was a group of RAR soldiers also doing paracourse. And after we'd done, they came in and I was watching this guy land. Everything we had learned had gone out the window. His arms were all over the place, his legs were all over the place, everything. And I just remember this, and he hit the ground and there was dust and everything. And I thought, no, the guy's dead, right? And then suddenly you just see this face come out of this with this smile from ear to ear, just so chuffed that he'd survived this. It was just, but the night training, that I remember jumping out of that airplane that night, and I was so scared that I became cross. I was just furious. I was so angry. I wanted to hit somebody, break somebody. How can you possibly make me jump out of this bloody thing when I can't see any? That was a terrifying experience. But paratraining was a lot of experience from that, I suppose. But again, we use the T10 shoots, which are those big round things, which do slow you down, but you can't drive them anywhere. You can't really get it. We were sent down to Wangi on an op which died, and so we were down there. So they made us do a fun jump. Never understood the concept of a fun jump. It's a little bit like a fun run. You know, they pose ideas, but yeah. So we did they dropped us onto the golf course outside Elephant Hills at Vic Falls.
And a guy broke his ankles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I broke. One guy broke his ankles. Two guys broke his ankles. I bruised my heels.
I remember that the altitude was wrong on the Dakota.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for telling me that.
Something was like that. The land went up, and so the distance of falling was shorter. I remember. Yeah. I was at Vic Falls when that happened.
Oh, really? Well, okay. Well, I was one of the three, and they chopped us out there, and they took us over the falls. It was a wonderful sightseeing tour. But we land on this golf course, right? And I'm sitting there bitching because the other guys both got broken legs, and you just suddenly hear, "Oh!" the four ball comes through. They didn't want to get interrupted by some idiots playing parachute on there.
Only in Rhodesia, man.
So yeah, and it took me longer to recover from my bruised heels and get back into parachuting than it did for the guys who'd broken their ankles. It was
yeah.
It's quite, and I spent the next little while walking around on tippy toes, unable to wear shoes, which was also yeah.
Tell us about your first combat jump. The nerves, the vomits, and the plane. Take us through some of the action and what happened when you hit the ground. How did you orientate yourself? How did you get in a line? Who was talking to you? What happened?
It was a mini field that we'd been dropped in. We'd come in. It was fortunate in that we weren't. I mean, sometimes when you were called out in that deck, and you had to sit in a waiting pattern, and you low down, and it's hot, and that deck is bouncing. You're hot. It's uncomfortable. And if you're susceptible to seasickness or air sickness like I am, it's not. That was hell. I would be in a helicopter any day of the week. Our first jump, we got the call out. We got dressed. We were still wearing the full at that stage, and we had to put on the full sort of parachute and the whole thing, and we went out. So it was hot. It was in northeast. It was hurricane, and we were dropped over this field. And alongside a river. And as we came down, I could see the tours running below, and they were firing up at us. I didn't feel any rounds or see anywhere the rounds are going, but you feel very vulnerable hanging at the end of a parachute when people are firing weapons at you because you can't do anything. When it came down, there was a pile of rocks that had been shifted aside from the midfield so they could plant, and as it seemed like I was aiming for those, and I just couldn't do anything with the chute to move. And I ended up landing on those and falling quite badly. I could still walk and everything. I didn't break anything. And you collect up your chute, you collapse everything, you get out. Now, we know these guys are around, and so we immediately get around. We form up as a line. I'm hobbling. I'm not the troop commander. I'm just carrying gun. And that was something else that we did as parachuters. You strap that gun to the side of you, that MAG, which is 23 pounds, plus the belts. No other paratroopers were ever asked to jump with that sort of weight. And then we just started to sweep. And by that time, the guys had got away, and we didn't actually get involved in the contact on that. But that was my first go at this parachuting thing, and not very successful, except that I hurt myself. And I much preferred being Fire Force in a helicopter than I did jumping out of an aeroplane. But it just was our job.
When you're on the ground, how do you orientate yourself? I mean, you can get quite disorientated coming down, can't you? Does the major say head north or head for that big tree or whatever?
You kind of know where everything is because there's been smoke put out, or that whether you can see where the helicopters are circling. Basically where everything is, but it does get a bit disoriented sometimes. You don't quite know where you are because you're jumping from such a low height. You're not going to get separated from your buddies. Yeah. There's no way is that you're going to be sort of 100 meters apart or anything like that. You're all very close together. So, and to go from there. I was never in charge of, but I was in charge of the sticks, but never in charge of the troop as they came out of the airplane. So the guy in charge of that always had comms with the K car. Remember, we never jumped if there wasn't helicopter support first. We didn't just jump somewhere. There was always other air support. The Alouettes were there always to give us direction and guidance. So, yeah.
So the 20mm cannon was a lifesaver from the K car, just pulverizing the position while you're moving forward. How close did our guys actually get to a tour area before they stopped firing the 20mm?
Down Birchnough Bridge, a very good friend of mine was shot by the K car in his arm and very nearly lost his arm. He kept it, and they did a lot of ops, and he still has it, but it's very badly damaged. So, like sometimes it would be very close. It would depend on your proximity and what they could see in the K car. So I guess when you're using a K car or a 20mm round, especially the explosive rounds, they sometimes came very close, but I never experienced a point where I thought that I might be in danger from the K car. When you were carrying a gun, you sat in the front seat of the helicopter, looking back. And immediately behind me was the engineer who was carrying the machine gun in the helicopter, his MAG in the helicopter. And he had his sights fixed to compensate for the movement of the helicopter, so he could shoot. And often I would try and shoot as well from where I was in the helicopter. Never, you had to try and change your dust, look for the dust and adjust. There's no point in aiming because it was quite a skill to shoot from the helicopters, but those guys were very, very good at what they did.
Frank, we've been going for nearly an hour now, or just over an hour, and that's the average length of our talk. But what I want to try and draw out of you now, all of this is not only a physical battle, it's a mental battle.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that after 3 years of doing this, other guys, you get back from a call out, you're mentally and physically drained. You need some type of relief, whether it's, I don't know, just diving in the pool or getting drunk or something. But often guys, you read Chris Cox's book and all that, they would sneak behind a tent and smoke something, or they would get into the alcohol in the evening. That really was to drown the feelings, or I just couldn't give a shit about anything. What did that lead into psychologically for you as you ground through this? I mean, if I'd been in that situation, I would have been a raving alcoholic. How did that develop for you?
Well, I am an alcoholic now, so it obviously had affected me from that point of view. Well, I don't drink now, but I had problems with alcohol. I had a very serious problem with alcohol. But when we drank in the army, it was something that you did. If you didn't drink, well, you weren't one of the guys. And we didn't mix with people who didn't drink, because, who the hell were they? It was just so much part of what you did. And, we didn't get a lot of money in the army, and so they gave us beer. Quite a lot. And, if you had a really good day, they'd give you a lot of beer. And if you had a really shit day, they'd give you a lot of beer. And if you just had any sort of day, you could still have a lot of beer. And we tended to drink a lot, especially on R&R. When you came back from R&R, first night back, out with the boys to drink. And the women couldn't understand that, but that was the deal. We've been transferred from somewhere, I forget, but we had to go through Salisbury for an overnight in Salisbury. So you would think that all the guys would go home to their wives and girlfriends. Not a chance. Because we're still on the bush trip here. We're not at home. We just happened to be passing through Salisbury. So that night we're out in town, we're at cocktail and we're getting pissed. We don't, it never, I didn't drink for the reason. I didn't drink to forget or drink to do. It was part of the hype, part of the excitement. It was all, this is what we did. We drank. And it was part of being a man. Real men could drink and that sort of thing. And when I left the army, my drinking sort of continued like that. But it's sort of, the reason I drank started to change a little bit. It wasn't for that high excitement and joy and fun. It became I began to drink because I needed to cope a little bit with it. I had a tough day, and then more and more, it became my coping mechanism. And you know, I say I have an alcohol problem, but I don't think that alcohol was my problem. My problem was that alcohol was my solution, and I used it to cope with everything. I've never had to cope with emotions, because every time I have an emotional upheaval, whether I'm happy or sad or whatever it is, I drink. And I started drinking at the age of what? Before I went to the army, maybe 17 odd. So I have the emotional maturity of a 17-year-old, because I've never learned to cope with my emotions. Right? And I don't know how to deal with these things. So I drink, and it became more and more of a problem. And finally, I decided to seek help for it, and I discovered that we're not all the same when it comes to alcohol. Some of us are wired differently. I'm wired differently to other people. My wife will have a couple of drinks and go to bed. I'll have a couple of drinks just to get going. We have she will relax with it. That's my go. And I also have a physical reaction that is different from other people, in that if I pick up one drink, I want a second. If I have two, I want four. And when I've had four, it gets no pud. There's no stopping me at that point, and I just go ballistic, and I don't know when I'm going to stop from there. And that's where alcohol became for me. So I have that physical reaction to alcohol that is different from other people. But also mentally, I'm different. I use alcohol for different reasons. Alcohol does for me what I cannot do for myself. And when I stopped drinking, I seemed unable to stay stopped. The drinking, when I was drinking, when I picked up that first drink, and then I just went and I just drank, and then everything else went out of my mind, then I craved alcohol. Just the next most important thing to me was my next drink. But when I've been sober for a while and I pick up a drink, I can't blame that physical. There's something else that tells me that this time I'm not going to do that. This time that reaction to alcohol is going to be different. This time I'm going to be fine. I'll just have one or two. And I never did that. And it just got progressively worse and worse and worse, until I got into this mire that, I couldn't drink anymore, because of what it was doing to me. And I couldn't not drink, because I was terrified of what would happen to me. It was just the worst place ever. My wife was about to leave. My business was almost completely closed. And I'm not one of those guys that lost everything. Didn't lose my car. I did occasionally, but I could find it the next morning, sort of thing. But it was, alcohol just got the better of me.
It's a double-edged sword. It's cutting away your problems, but as the blade comes back, it's cutting you as well.
But it doesn't cut away your problems. That's a problem. It used to help me a lot. It used to help me, but then it starts doing to me what I was using it for. I use it for courage. And then I would wake up at 3:00 in the morning with these fears, this almost paranoia, anxiety. But twice I took myself into hospital because I thought I was having a heart attack, right? And it was just anxiety attacks. Alcohol gave me that. Wonderful thing. I don't miss those part of my drinking much. And, I remember when I first went for help, and I was going to go to this meeting about it. And I couldn't take myself into that meeting. And one of my fears was, how can you possibly live life without alcohol? How can you go through life without alcohol? And I couldn't see that. I didn't know what these guys were going to tell me, but I knew they were going to tell me how to stop drinking. And I didn't know how to stop drinking. I didn't know how to cope with life without alcohol. And that was a terrifying thought. And their answer to that was, don't do it for the whole of your life. Just do it for today. And it sounds ridiculously simple, but I did it just for a day. And that became a day, became a week, became a month, became 22 years and 3 months since my last drink.
Fantastic. That's wonderful, man.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a long time between drinks, but it's
Wow.
It was the best decision in my life to look for help. And so many guys, and I see it sometimes, people just are determined that they can fix this on their own. I could not fix it on my own. I had all that willpower. I'm not the brightest light in the harbor, but I am not stupid. I'm relatively bright. I can get by. Yet I couldn't work that problem out. I couldn't fix it myself. I needed help. And it's there. It's just there. All I had to do was take it. And I didn't know that.
That's a lovely story. It's more than a story. It's a revelation for many people who might be listening to this. There's one other aspect of it for me, because I wasn't quite becoming an alcoholic, but I was drinking a lot. I found that I needed to be forgiven. I needed to forgive myself for, some of the things I did that were similar to yours. And I needed that forgiveness. And I needed it not just from people. I needed it from a higher authority. And so when I became a Christian on the 31st of May in 1981 in Johannesburg, when that pastor up front said to me, God can forgive you for every single thing you've done, everything you've ever committed, every sin, every stupidity, it'll be gone, you'll be forgiven. And when I stuck my hand up, I'll tell you, I cried for probably 40 minutes without exaggeration. So much so that they had to take me to a room at the back of the hall and be ministered to by one of the leaders. But it was that feeling of being unforgiven. I'm forgiven. I don't have this thing I did is not beholden to anybody anymore. There's no power in the universe that can convict me, because I'm forgiven. And yeah, it's wonderful what you've started and what you've accomplished. I really admire you. And it's good. That's all I want to say. I've given you my story and you've given yours. It's tremendous.
If I can just add to that, the only solution for me with my drinking problem has been having a spiritual experience of some description.
Yeah.
Yours is what you had there, that spiritual experience, that sudden light brain. Mine hasn't been one of those big instant. Mine's been more of the educational variety. And I've had to do a lot of introspection. And one of the things I've discovered is that I have a lack of self-esteem. I have, and it's essence, and I have this. I'm uncertain. And when I look back now at my career in the army, and I look back at that, and I think, why didn't I do that officer's course? At the time, I would have told you I didn't want to sign on for 10 years. The truth is, I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think, and I thought I was terrified that people might see that I'm not as capable as I thought I was. And those little insecurities that have come in through my life, which I've never realized before, but I've had to look at and try and find in my journey, this journey that I've gone in trying to sustain my sobriety. It's those sort of things that have been so wonderful now. I understand these things. I still have those, but I know them now and I can work with them. And a lot of my reaction to life has been based on that very simple thing, that insecurity of, do I fit in? And that's what alcohol did for me. It helped me to fit in.
Yes, it numbed you to the problems. It just numbed you, really, didn't it?
Yeah. Also, I was one of the guys.
Yeah. No, that's really good. It's tremendous. It's very cathartic for you talking about this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I've noticed many other men who've come on here have just found so much relief in having a talk like this. We're going to have to close soon, Frank, but the last question I want to ask you is, PTSD, is that something that's followed you through this process?
I don't know. It was not something that we ever had or spoke about when we came out of the army. PTSD was just for wusses. Huh? Yeah. It's not for us real men. Yeah. But it's the same like with my drinking problem. People, only quitters stop drinking and that sort of. Whereas for me, it was a real problem and I had to do something about it. And PTSD could well be. And I still see my reaction to a certain amount of life now, the way I react. I've actually started going now to a psychologist because of my behavior in certain aspects, which I don't have an excuse for anymore. I don't drink. Yeah. I don't, but why do I behave the way I do? Could it be PTSD? I don't know if I want to use that as an excuse to justify my behavior or if it is a genuine thing. And I don't know well enough about it. I just know that PTSD is a very, very real thing. And you can't go through experiences like many of us have been through and not have some form of PTSD. Absolutely. It is a traumatic experience. We don't realize it. We don't think about it.
Even immigrating to another country can cause PTSD. I'm speaking from experience.
Living with my wife can cause it. But anyway, that's
Frank, in closing this lovely story that you've shared with us, go and look at Barry Zoratin's episode 119.
I've got that written down. Thank you.
Buy his book. I believe it's really all his books. He's become an authority on PTSD through his own experiences. So I encourage you to read that, and you might just find some magic gems in there that just lock into this whole thing that you're facing, you know.
Yeah.
But we're running out of time now, and I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming on board. I'd like to encourage other guys who've watched this to please come and talk. Farmers' wives, I want you, please, please, please come on board. And yeah, subscribe and smack the bell. Frank, thank you very much. And
Thank you, Tony. And as you said, it is cathartic. I didn't think I'd be able to talk about this. I don't talk about this thing to anybody. The stories I've told you today have been. I don't talk to anybody about it, and there is a little bit of release in that. So I would also encourage other people.
Yes.
Just do this. Just come and talk. It is. I haven't. Obviously, it's too early to tell you the result, but I feel better for it.
Fantastic.
And I thank you for that. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done. Thank you, Frank.
Okay. All right, my friend.
God bless. Bye-bye.